Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman here in our Northwest Side studio.
And I'm Paris Schutz reporting live from the West Garfield Park neighborhood.
On the show tonight,
the needs are there, the needs could increase.
How COVID-19 and the summer's civil unrest has affected West Garfield Park.
I don't know who the Proud Boys are.
A podcast delves into youth participation in white supremacist hate groups within the Chicago area. Cook County leads the state in vehicle-on-deer collisions. A look at what makes this season particularly dangerous.
We're going to start Nick Foles.
The Bears make a change at quarterback, but will the NFL season be completed after Tennessee Titan players test positive for COVID-19? Remember live music? Jeffrey Bear has the story of a famous Chicago nightclub. And meet a White Sox fan who obsessively illustrates every one of their games.
Brandis, as we mentioned, I'm co-anchoring tonight in the West Garfield Park neighborhood as part of our In Your Neighborhood series for Chicago Tonight. West Garfield Park has had its share of challenges over the last several decades: historic disinvestment, higher rates of violence, higher rates of health and drug problems, and COVID and the resultant economic fallout has only exacerbated those problems. But this is a very resilient community, and we'll find out exactly why in just a bit. But first, Brandis, we toss it back to you for top stories.
Looking forward to more. Thank you, Paris. With just a quarter of the year remaining, Chicago's homicide rate for 2020 is approaching 600 deaths after the deadliest September in decades. The Chicago Police Department says there were 81 homicides in September, the highest in a September since 1993. CPD says while overall crime is down 7% year to date, homicides and shootings remain well above 2019 at 50 and 51% increases. The city's Loop Supersite polling place opened today for voters who wanted to cast their ballots early. The Chicago Board of Elections says more than 1,000 people came through to vote. You just saw a line of them socially distanced outside. Early voting locations across the city open in just under 2 weeks. So far, more than 450,000 people have applied for vote-by-mail ballots. More than 8,200 have already been completed and sent back to the Board of Elections. And instead of canceling Halloween because of the pandemic, Chicago is making it into a week-long celebration.
We're trying to spread it out over the course of the week, but the reality is Halloween is a great holiday. We all have fun with it, as you can see, but we want people to do it safely. And so putting out some very specific guidelines, dealing with the reality. I think telling people not to trick-or-treat isn't realistic. They're going to trick-or-treat.
Yes, that was Mayor Lori Lightfoot in costume, dressed as the Rona Destroyer, giving candy to members of the media. At least I think it was candy. The Public Health Commissioner, Dr. Allison Arwady, got in on the fun, joined her. The mayor says the purpose of an entire week of Halloween, a Hallow-week, is to spread out the activities and the people to avoid the spread of the virus. As under the state's rules, haunted houses and house parties are banned, and there are some other guidelines. For more on those, please visit our website. Meanwhile, the state announces an additional 2,100 cases of the coronavirus and 25 more deaths. The statewide case total stands at 295,000 and just under 8,700 deaths. The 7-day positivity rate is 3.5%. An exciting year for the White Sox ends with a thud. Things look good in the second inning when rookie Lewis Robert hit this 487-foot homer to give the Sox a 1-0 lead. Too bad there's nobody in the stands to catch it. But the Sox couldn't hold that lead as walks and errors led to runs for Oakland. Final score, A's 6, Sox 4. And for the Sox, it's wait until next year. Game 2 of the Cubs playoff series against Miami was postponed until tomorrow. So if there's a silver lining in Chicago's COVID and economic crises, some community groups say that the situation has shined a light on historic inequities in Black and brown communities, and the city is mobilizing to tackle those problems in a way it hasn't before. Tonight, Paris Schutz and field producer Marissa Nelson are in West Garfield Park for our In Your Neighborhood series. The community is on the city's west side. It's 93% African American and has been vulnerable to COVID and the job losses that have followed. But community groups there are sounding an optimistic tone. Paris Schutz joins us from the Tops and Bottoms store. Looks really busy and fun there, Paris.
It is. Lots of great apparel and shoes here at the Tops and Bottoms store on the corner of Madison and Pulaski here in West Garfield Park. This is a community that has had historic challenges dating all the way back to the late 60s and 70s, but it's a very tight-knit community that is filled with block clubs and community organizations that are addressing those challenges, like violent crime. You mentioned the high numbers throughout the city this year, also high in West Garfield Park, 328 shootings and 72 homicides just in the neighborhood this year. That is up 43 and 20% respectively over last year. 42% of the population here lives below the poverty level, and all this is a situation that is only exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis, where the local zip code has seen about an 11% testing positivity rate. That's about twice the city at large. So it is an acute problem here in West Garfield Park. And there are other issues that are sort of related to that: opioid overdoses, a higher rate of homelessness. But there are organizations like Habilitative Systems that say the community has mobilized like never before, thanks to some public and private grants to deal with COVID. But those grants can be used to tackle some of these structural problems that have been ongoing in this neighborhood for decades, like helping people with trauma from gun violence or helping them with mentoring.
When you look in the faces of these folks, you see some significant desperation, you see significant concern about their well-being and that of their family members. And of course, we're also dealing with the civil unrest and the violence in the community. We're not talking about PTSD and post-traumatic stress. We're talking about prolonged traumatic stress within the community, and in many cases, generational trauma.
So it's a community that is no stranger to trauma, and then there are longtime residents of Garfield Park that say this corridor here, Madison and Pulaski, they remember a time where it was booming with business. For years now, that corridor has been somewhat run down, although we're told it has been getting slowly, progressively better over the years before the double whammy of COVID and then the civil unrest hit. The Garfield Park Chamber of Commerce says most of these businesses were hit with damage and looting, but most of them are rebuilding and vowing to stay in business. And a big part of the community healing that goes on here is having those businesses hire from within the community.
And so what we're encouraging them to do is to continue to hire from the community, continue to rent your facility if it's vacant, rent it to a black business owner. You know, start allowing the people to see folks that look like them in their community. That has been a concern for the residents. It's like, okay, we don't mind supporting the businesses, but we need to see more people of color that look like us.
One of those businesses is Dreamtown, another shoe and athletic apparel store, just like Tops and Bottoms here. There are many of them around this precinct here, Madison and Pulaski. Now, that store is owned by the Kim family. They have about a half a dozen locations throughout the region. He says vandals and looters broke into the back of the store and turned it upside down in early June. But he says it has not deterred him from keeping this store open, because it is a store that has been in this neighborhood for decades.
My family and we've discussed this, whether or not we should stay open or if we should close up shop. And ultimately, we just wanted to feel like we're not going to go down without fighting more. And so that's why we're trying to stay open, reopen, and fix the store up.
A lot of foot traffic around this area too, and another pressing issue, well, one that was pressing before the pandemic, is food insecurity, which is why the Garfield Park Community Council manages about 30 community gardens throughout the neighborhood, just like this one right here. Then they sell their produce, like tomatoes and kale and lettuce, at a local farmer's market for a small fee. Now, the wellness coordinator there, Angela Taylor, says that as difficult as COVID has been, there has been a positive here because food pantries have stepped up. Other service organizations have stepped up to provide food to the community, and this community garden is playing no small role as well.
All of the food that we sell at the market comes from the community gardens here in Garfield Park. So with that being said, we were very happy to be able to address that food insecurity issue for residents of the community, as well as know that it gave them hope that something that was built from communities was surviving during the pandemic.
And the other issue on the minds of residents is the possible potential here for a housing crisis, an eviction crisis. Right now, as you know, there is an eviction moratorium in Chicago and across the state. But if that somehow lifts in the near future, it could really impact a community like West Garfield Park. But the other edge of that sword is there are a lot of folks in this community that are building owners that rent out some of their units, 2 flats, 3 flats, walk-ups, and they have been without rental income for more than 6 months.
In addition to the people who are, out of work and renting, a lot of homes in Garfield Park are two flats and 3 flats of small owners, right? So people that own and have a mortgage of themselves, and they use the rent money to pay that mortgage. So the fact that they're not getting rent, but still being charged taxes, is really hard on those smaller 2 flat and 3 flat owners who are now suffering as well.
It's a lot of challenges here in West Garfield Park, but a lot of community energy here to come together and try to solve a lot of those challenges that have been around since before COVID. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the opioid crisis here and some of the higher rates of violence and what the community is doing about that. But first, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Yeah, Paris, that's something that the West Side communities have been especially hard hit by. Thanks. We'll see you in a bit. And now to Phil Ponce and an issue that has vaulted into the headlines following this week's presidential debate. Phil.
Brandis, the Southern Poverty Law Center says white nationalist hate groups in America have increased by 55% from 2017 to last year under President Trump. That center says one of those hate groups is the Proud Boys, a white nationalist group that Trump failed to strongly condemn when asked to during Tuesday's presidential debate. Now Trump says he doesn't know of the hate group.
I don't know who the Proud Boys are. I mean, you'll have to give me a definition because I really don't know who they are. I can only say they have to stand down, let law enforcement do their work. Law enforcement will do the work more and more. As people see how bad this radical liberal Democrat movement is and how weak, the law enforcement's going to come back stronger and stronger. But again, I don't know who Proud Boys are.
Joining us to take a deeper look at white supremacy in America are WBEZ reporter Odette Youssef, host of the podcast Motive, which delves into youth participation in white supremacist hate groups for its 3rd season, and David Goldenberg, Midwest Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. And we welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. Real quickly, David Goldenberg, who are the Proud Boys and why are they considered dangerous?
Absolutely. So thanks for having me. The Proud Boys are a misogynistic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, racist, anti-immigrant group who fancies themselves as kind of a guys group, a drinking group. But the reality is that they are known to be a violent group, one that has essentially self-appointed themselves as the self-appointed police force of the right, including the GOP establishment. And they're known, if you see at some of these Trump rallies and others, as wearing their black polo shirts and their red Make America Great hats. And they've got a history of that type of violence.
Former Vice President Joe Biden is now calling the president's stand back and stand by comment the group's new emblem.
Go online. Look at Proud Boys. They got a new emblem now, literally. It says stand down and stand by, implying that if he loses the election, something may have to be done.
Odette, is there any way to know how hate groups are reacting to those comments, that exchange during Tuesday night's debate?
There is, Phil. If you were on Twitter, you would have seen that in the minutes after the president said his statement, stand back and stand by, the Proud Boys did actually generate an image with those words on it. This was taken as a rallying cry by the Proud Boys, and I would say more broadly in the white supremacist movement, the organized white supremacist movement, those words were emboldening.
Odette, let me stay with you for a second, because your podcast zeroes in on youth participation within the white supremacist movement, particularly the neo-Nazi skinheads in Chicago. What role did Chicago have in sort of birthing the movement, for lack of a better term?
Sure. The neo-Nazi skinhead movement is something that actually originated in England. And it came to the U.S. a few years later. And one of the first places that it started was right here in Chicago. It started with one individual that we talk about in the podcast, a man named Clark Martell, who actually had been sort of schooled by older line white supremacists, people that were part of like the American Nazi Party, for example, but then who identified sort of the burgeoning punk music scene in Chicago as a place where he might be able to seed that message of hate with young people. And the music that was coming out of England at that time was really important to help to spread the ideology. And over the next decade and a half, that's what we saw sort of spread across the United States was the spreading of racial hatred through this sort of racist music that the neo-Nazi skinheads were listening to, and the emergence of these neo-Nazi skinhead crews across the U.S.
David Goldenberg, one normally thinks of hate groups, at least historically, as being older people, the Ku Klux Klan and so forth. Why are young people attracted to hate groups, would you say?
So I think what we've seen is a dramatic increase in sort of what I would call white supremacist propaganda, especially over the last 3 years. ADL's tracked a more than 530% increase in white supremacist propaganda since between 2017 and 2019. And what is most concerning is it was a more than 110% increase on college campuses. So you see often in this organized way, these white supremacist groups are going after younger people who they consider to be more vulnerable. But then also, when you think about it, this piece of technology right here is totally different. It's changed the game for hate groups. Long gone are those days where you have to find a meeting in the darkness of the night. Somebody can just pick up their smartphone and be connected with an extremist, not only in their city or in their state or even their country, but around the world. And so younger people have greater access to hate speech, to hate ideology, to hate symbols that they never had before, just even 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. So that's a big problem that we've got going on right now.
Odette, in addition to the use of social media by hate groups, what would you say is the to what extent do you think the president's rhetoric has contributed to the rise in hate groups?
I've spoken with a lot of people that have been more recently involved in some of these hate groups since 2016. And the president's rhetoric was a huge turning point for many of them. It was often, what people told me was, it was often his anti-immigrant speech, the rhetoric around building a wall along the US border that got them interested in it. And that sort of was the first step on the, down the rabbit hole. And just as David said, it was sort of the algorithms on social media platforms like Facebook that were offering to them additional and more radicalizing content that took them deeper into the extreme right.
David, if Joe Biden were to win the presidency, if he were to win the election, to what extent are you concerned about the rhetoric? Stand by and stand back and stand by. What might be the consequences of that if Biden were to win?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear too. The president had an opportunity to condemn it, and he didn't sort of condemn it. He didn't condemn it at all. And I think, as Odette said, it's become a rallying cry and essentially a call to arms. And so regardless of what happens in November, ADL's tracking and what's occurring online and in real life amongst extremists, how they're organizing, are they organizing, and to the extent we can, trying to thwart when we can. But additionally, though, it's going to take a lot to put this rabbit back in the hole or the genie back in the bottle, regardless of what happens in 4 weeks from now. But it's incumbent upon all of us as Americans to stand up and speak out against this type of hate, and to say this is not who we are as a country, and we're not going to allow it to occur. And so we've got to be vigilant in that. Law enforcement has to be aware. We've got to make sure that they've got the resources that they need, and the intelligence and collecting the intelligence that they need to stop these things from happening.
David Goldenberg, Odette Youssef, thank you both for joining us. We very much appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Phil, thank you. And now we check back in with Paris Schutz, who's reporting live from West Garfield Park as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Paris.
Yeah, Brandon, we're joined right now at the Tops and Bottoms store here in West Garfield Park by 28th Ward Alderman Jason Irvin, whose ward includes a lot of West Garfield Park. Alderman Irvin, thank you so much for being here and being inside with us because we're trying to get out of the weather. So we were talking about COVID, and it's about a higher rate here, a higher testing positivity rate. What are the big challenges you're facing in this community as it relates to COVID?
As it relates to COVID, we face some issues around poverty and PDS, primarily doing the right thing with social distancing. A lot of our youngsters are not heeding that advice and unfortunately bring that disease home to the grandparents, the aunts and uncles. We've lost quite a few people. Some prominent people in our community have passed over the last 6 to 8 months from COVID. And the only thing we can do is continue to educate, pass out personal protective equipment as we've been doing for a number of months, and continue to do and will do till we get to the end of this pandemic.
It's certainly sad to lose prominent folks because of this disease. And also the situation in early June after the George Floyd protests, you saw some looting come out to the neighborhoods. Madison Pulaski got hit pretty hard. Do you think the worst is over? Have the businesses made it through the storm? Can this district come back?
I believe the West Side has great resiliency. We've been through the riots of '68. We've been through the Bulls championships. We've been through a lot here on the west side of Chicago. And I believe that our folks here, especially here in West Garfield Park, this is the heart of the west side of Chicago. The Madison Business Strip rivaled Michigan Avenue back in the day as the #1 place for people to shop. And as you can see here today, we got plenty of people that still believe in the west side. They come to all the businesses here along Madison to purchase their wares. And again, I bet you just about everybody on the west side has been in this store.
Certainly packed in here today, and a lot of great shoe stores and apparel stores here. What about police presence? There's a lot of aldermen upset that police are being taken, resources are being taken from communities on the west and south side to go down and guard downtown in the Loop. Is that a problem here?
I believe it is. I mean, when we look at a district such as the 11th district where we are today, losing resources when we're continuing battling narcotics, open-air drug sales, prostitution, and violence, for us to lose individuals to go downtown is a bit much for us to take. And again, this was a change in policy as we were originally told that we would not lose resources in Tier 1 districts, which include the 11th district, the 15th district.
So we're here in the 11th police district.
This is the 11th district, yes.
So what's to blame for that sort of miscommunication there? Was it the mayor that told you that you wouldn't lose?
No, the mayor did not mention this. This came from the police superintendent directly, and it was a direct question that I asked and other members of the Black Caucus asked, because we are concerned about police presence in our communities, and it's very difficult to stave off things without the proper resources in the community.
So is there any recourse there? Are you going to try and talk to the superintendent again to get some of those resources back?
As we're getting ready to go into budget season, those conversations will definitely be on the table, because no community really can afford to lose resources given everything that's going on, especially communities plagued by violence, narcotics, and other criminal activity. We need our police here to do their job more than ever.
And speaking of violence, I mean, it is up all over the city, but it's up here, at least violent crime in West Garfield Park, as we mentioned, about 20 to 40% higher than last year, more opioid overdoses. Is that due to COVID and the economic fallout, or are there other factors here?
It's due to a couple of factors. You mentioned the opioid epidemic, and again, this area here along Pulaski here is part of that heroin highway where we see a lot of heroin traffic. We see a lot of people from outside of our community come here to buy drugs, and that's just not right. And again, we want folks that live in Wheaton and Winnetka, don't come to my community to do your dirt. Please do your stuff where you live. Don't come over here to buy drugs, hang out, destroy our community, and then go back to Winnetka where you live. That's just not right.
Do you need more presence to kind of take out those drug markets, those open-air drug markets?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think we also have to focus on the demand side.
Yeah.
It takes two to tango. And if we're not focusing on the demand, we've been trying to deal with the supply side of this for the last 50 years, and it has failed. What we haven't done is dealt with those that are using drugs, because, again, if there's no one to buy drugs, there's no one here to sell them. So, again, we have to focus on the demand side of this equation, work with people to get them the proper treatment, and work with those that don't want treatment. Then we have to find something else for them.
You mentioned the heroin highway, K-Town, all areas around the west side have had problems with that, but a lot of positivity we saw in the community today about people coming together. Alderman Irvin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Brandis will be back with more from West Garfield Park in just a bit, but now we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. We'll see you in a bit. And up next, a preview of Sunday's matchup between the Bears and the Colts. Stick around.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
The Bears are undefeated, but starting quarterback Mitch Trubisky has been benched. Instead, Nick Foles will make his first start of the season after leading a comeback against the Falcons last week. Up next, the 2-1 Indianapolis Colts, who have the top-ranked defense in the league. Joining us now to talk about the upcoming game against the Colts, as well as the impact of positive COVID tests around the league, is former Bears offensive lineman James Big Cat Williams. Welcome back, James, as always. So, as of Wednesday, 9 Tennessee Titans players have tested positive for COVID-19, and their game against the Pittsburgh Steelers has been postponed. What impact do you think all of this will have on the league?
I really don't think this is going to have a big impact on the league. I don't think, unless things get really bad where you start having 2, 3, 4 teams pop up at the same time with multiple players, I think the NFL is going to fight through this and, keep on trying to push forward.
And now a quick correction. It's actually been 11 players, not 9. I misspoke earlier. And here's a statement from the NFL and the NFL Players Association after Titans players tested positive following their game against the Vikings. Quote, both clubs are working closely with the NFL and the NFLPA, including our infectious disease experts, to evaluate close contacts, perform additional testing, and monitor health developments. All decisions will be made with health and safety as our primary consideration. Big Cat, do you think it's possible that the NFL might not be able to complete this season?
Well, I think things would have to get really, really bad. Like I said before, if you're starting to have multiple players on multiple teams, for instance, if the Vikings would have popped up with 5, 6, 7 positive tests after playing Tennessee, then I think they would have started, the NFL would have started to say, okay, now we're starting to see a problem. If we can't fix this soon, we might have to shut the whole thing down.
Which I'm sure a bunch of fans would not love that. What impact do you think this would have on the fans in a city, that loves its football team?
Well, unfortunately, there's nothing the fans would be able to do about it. I mean, we've gone through several months, March, April, May, of not knowing whether there were going to be any sports whatsoever. You watch the NBA and NHL pull off their seasons, and now they're in the playoffs. The NHL is done, and you really didn't hear a lot about it. But you're not dealing with the sizes, the amounts of people that you're dealing with when you talk about an NFL team, an entire roster, the coaching staff, the personnel needed to run practices. These are a lot of people, and if you're talking about trying to bubble that many people, that's a lot.
So obviously, football's a really high contact sport. Do you think some players might have reservations about playing at a time like this?
Well, yeah, you've already seen players opt out. We had Jordan Lucas and Eddie Goldman from the Bears that opted out before the season even started. It was something that was available to the players. So you have to believe that the players that are playing now understood the risks that they were going to be taken, and they were willing to deal with it. So, I don't see any players opting out now because Tennessee had a high number of individuals test from their organization. But you never know 3 or 4 weeks down the road.
So obviously the big story out of last week's game against the Falcons was Mitch Trubisky being benched. Nick Foles, is he the long-term answer as QB for the Bears? Are we going to see him for the rest of the season, you think? However long the season is.
I think we'll see him for the rest of the season. Long-term is a stretch. I mean, he's a 31-year-old quarterback. He's a journeyman. He's been all over the league, and he's a good fit for what the Bears need right now. But the Bears are going to have to go out and find themselves a young quarterback that Nagy can mold into exactly what he wants. But I believe that, going forward these next couple of games or for the rest of this season, Nick Foles is going to bring some energy to this team, not only offensively, but defensively.
So, obviously it sounds like Foles is a bit of an upgrade then from Trubisky?
Yeah, well, if you just think back, if you look at the press conference that they did after the game in Atlanta, and Foles answered a couple questions as far as things that he did on the sideline, talking to Nagy about the plays that he liked to run, the things that he would like to see them do out there, being able to talk to the players and give them, look, if you see this out of the defense, I'm going to do this. If you see this, I'm going to do that. This is NFL quarterback communication. And, that's something we didn't see all of last year or the beginning of this year.
Okay, so just a few seconds left. The Bears are up against the Indianapolis Colts. Foles will be starting for the first time. Predictions?
I'm going to go with the Bears over the Colts. I think that, Foles being the starter, it does inject some energy into this team. The Colts are a good team, but it's going to be on the defense this week. Can they slow that Colts offense down? They have a high-priced offensive line that can move people off the ball, and the Bears are going to have to step up to the task.
Okay, as usual, our thanks to James Big Cat Williams. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Francis. Appreciate it.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight. Pretty fall colors may be a pleasant addition to your drive, but watch out. Autumn is the most dangerous time of year for deer collisions. Jeffrey Bear on an iconic Chicago folk music club in this week's Ask Jeffrey. And meet a White Sox fan who obsessively illustrates every one of their games. But first, some more of today's top stories. United Airlines employees are among the 32,000 being furloughed by U.S. Airlines today. The $25 billion the industry received in federal COVID-19 relief efforts came with the condition that airlines would avoid layoffs. That agreement expired yesterday. American and United say they could reverse the furloughs if Congress and the White House quickly agree to provide billions more dollars in aid. Meanwhile, the state announces an additional 2,100 cases of the coronavirus and 25 more deaths. The statewide case total stands at 295,000 and just under 8,700 deaths. The 7-day positivity rate is 3.5%. Ballet fans may not be on point with this. The Joffrey Ballet announces it has canceled its entire 2020-2021 season due to the pandemic. Instead, the company announces the creation of the Joffrey Studio series, a slate of virtual programming including interviews and behind-the-scenes content with the artists from Joffrey Tower. It's also announcing 25 for 25, a year-long series of free performances and programs celebrating 25 years of the Joffrey in Chicago. This year would have been the company's inaugural year on the stage at Lyric Opera House. Also going virtual this year, Chris Kindle Market. The Chicago Loop Alliance today says the holiday shopping tradition will be, quote, home for the holidays. Instead of visiting Daley Plaza or Wrigleyville, Chris Kindle Market shoppers will have to log on. Special pre-order events begin today. You might feel like a deer in headlights when you hear this story. Cook County is the first in the state for the most deer collisions. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. And Patty, it's a little bit surprising, since Chicago takes up so much of Cook County, that you'd think there'd be fewer deer collisions here, but that's not the case.
No, and I think for those of us who, like myself, who live along the North Branch of the Chicago River, we're kind of used to seeing deer out and about in the city. And so the Illinois Department of Natural Resources did expressly say that deer can be found in urban as well as rural areas, as is shown by Cook County, leading the way in the number of deer vehicle collisions in 2019. So we kind of all need to be especially vigilant, especially this time of year, to avoid those crashes.
Yeah, that's right. The agencies say that, well, the graphic is gone now, but quite a few happening in the state of Illinois. Why does the Illinois Department of Transportation say that this time of year is particularly dangerous for deer-related crashes?
Yeah, I mean, we saw over 16,000 of those crashes in the state in 2019, and nearly 500 of them in Cook County. And this time of year is when about 40% of those crashes will occur between October, November, and December. And that's because it's mating season for deers. So these love-struck deers are, they're out and about, they're on the move, looking for love. And they're more apt to be around in the early morning hours, in dawn, and especially at dusk around twilight. Twilight is when around 70% of these collisions happen. So you need to just be a lot more aware that these creatures could be crossing the road, and they're not going to let you get in the way.
Keep your eyes open, obviously. Be sure you're scanning the road for those deer. Patty Wetley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website, where you can also find tips from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources on how to prevent deer-related collisions and what to do if it does happen. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And ahead on Chicago Tonight, we check back in with Paris Schutz in West Garfield Park as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. But first, this is the final evening of Chicago Tonight's membership drive, and we invite you to get involved with your support by calling 773-588-1111 or go online to WTTW.com. As we move closer to Election Day, there are constant reminders of the many issues that concern and divide us, whether on the national stage or in our local communities. We continue to be challenged by everyday issues as well as COVID-19's impact on public health and our economy, and with how to best respond to the ongoing cries for social justice. It's more important than ever for public television to be the place where we can all come together to discuss and understand how Chicago and the communities we live in can move forward. And there's no better place for people from all walks of life to focus deeply and to learn openly than on public television. That's the reason why here at WTTW News, we've increased our news and public affairs programming. It's part of our commitment to keep you informed, both on air and online, about the issues that matter most. In order to keep these vital lines of communication open, your donation of any size is welcome and needed.
Now more than ever, fact-based news coverage is vital to our Chicago community. If you haven't already joined the WTTW family, now's the time to make an impact with your financial support. With your ongoing gift of just $5 a month or a one-time contribution of $60, you'll get access to Passport, an exclusive streaming service for members that lets you watch thousands of your favorite WTTW and PBS programs. Call 773-588-1111 or go online to WTTW.com to become a member and unlock Passport right now. Thank you.
During these times, the purpose of WTTW News is amplified and made more urgent. And that purpose is to keep you informed through fact-based coverage that brings context to stories and interviews. Our goal is to provide reporting you can trust that empowers you to gain clarity on what's happening across the city so that you can make informed decisions about your life, community, and the governments that serve you. Our top-notch political reporters, for example, are keeping an eye out as city officials navigate this massive budget deficit, as lawmakers head to Springfield for the veto session. Of course, we'll bring candidate forums as we get closer to Election Day in November. And as always, our online voter guide lets you learn more about the candidates so you can make your own choices. As an education reporter, I'm keeping an eye out on if and how Chicago Public School students will return to the classroom. The type of coverage you expect on Chicago Tonight is unique to local independent news, but running a strong newsroom takes financial resources. That's why we're asking for your support to help keep this essential public service strong now and into the future. Members provide the highest amount of financial support to the station. Tonight is the last night for our Chicago Tonight membership drive. We ask that you join WTTW and support the journalism you rely on. It doesn't take much to make a difference, but it does take the help of everyone who values what we provide here at WTTW News and Chicago Tonight. You can make a contribution of any amount by calling 773-588-1111 or by going online to WTTW.com to make your donation. And thank you. Now we go back to Paris Schutz in Chicago's West Garfield Park neighborhood, where he spent the day reporting as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Paris.
Yeah, Brandis, I'm joined now by Reverend Walter Amir Jones here from the CEO of Fathers Who Care, which is a great organization here in West Garfield Park dealing with violence and drug abuse. And I want to pick up where we talked about the opioid epidemic and how there's a spike this year. What are you seeing on the ground? Why is that happening?
Well, what I'm really seeing is that we've trained 1,847 individuals in the West Garfield Park to administer naloxone and Narcan in our efforts to reduce overdose in the community.
Right, naloxone and Narcan, you give someone that's having an overdose that, and it brings them back to life, basically.
Absolutely, it reverses the overdose.
Right.
And it brings them back to life, we revitalize them. So we're training folks because there's an influx or increase in overdoses here in the West Garfield Park community because most people in the neighborhood are depressed. They're stressed out, they're experiencing a great deal of anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and all kind of other pandemics in this community. So what we're trying to do collectively is bring the resources back to the community so that we can save lives and that we can hopefully improve the quality of life for individuals in the West Garfield Park community.
Talked about the stress and the anxiety given the pandemic and the economy. How do you counsel folks that are turning to substance abuse because of this?
Well, first thing we do is we try to share the love with them. And hopefully try to counsel those who need additional counseling, provide referrals for those who need additional referral. But also we try to make sure that we provide an avenue for them to come and talk, for them to express themselves and encourage them to express themselves and let them know that it's okay to express yourselves, because most folks in this community, unfortunately, have very limited resources. We're in the food desert. We have very limited mental health facilities in the community, so they don't know which way to turn. So what we're trying to do is bring additional resources, bring additional support, and let folks know that there are options, that you do have hope in this community. We try to improve the quality of life, bring additional resources, and improve life.
You also deal with violence in West Garfield Park and try to counsel people that have gone through trauma because of that. There was an event last weekend with police officers in the community.
A great event.
Very different from the perception of abolish the police or defund the police. The police were dancing with folks, and they actually have a pretty positive interaction in this community. Talk about police and community relations here.
Well,
in
what
West
you
Garfield
saw
Park.
was the real community engagement with the community and the police. And what we did from here on Madison and Pulaski to Madison and Hamlin, we shut down the blocks with the assistance of the aldermen, the police department, and others. And we did a block party. And all of us came together. We brought resources all around the neighborhood to those in the community, to empower those in the community. So we passed out PPE, we passed out resources, we passed out shirts, we passed out food. Anything folks thought they wanted, we had it. Now, the relationship with the law enforcement and the community, they were actually dancing, and they wasn't faking it.
You're talking about the police officers.
I'm talking about the police officers.
Yeah.
They were really in their groove.
Yeah,
And if you saw it, and it's all over, it went viral. It was an absolutely wonderful time where folks was loving on each other, supporting each other, and we bridging that gap between police and the community. There are some good police here. We're not denying that. And of course, a lot of folks have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, but we don't echo that in our neighborhood. Because under the leadership of Commander Spencer and his team, we are in the community. His law enforcement officer or the police are in the community, working closely with the community to make sure we bring about a change.
So a lot of the protests and images of people yelling at the police, throwing stuff at the police, you have a different feeling here in West Garfield Park.
Absolutely, because I actually work with the police and I actually work with the community, and I'm actually trying to bring about change, positive change in the community. Now I don't condone looting, but I understand when people are hurt, they hurt people. And so I believe folks who are doing the looting are mentally disturbed. I think they're hurt. I think they're just trying to find outlets, and they're just following someone else.
Well, that's a lot of great work you're doing, Reverend Walter Muir Jones, Fathers Who Care, great organization here in Garfield Park and West Side. Thank you so much for joining us, and all the best to you.
Keep up the good work. West Garfield rock.
All right. That's enthusiasm right there in West Garfield Park. All right, Brandis, we'll wrap up the show in just a bit, but now we toss it back to you.
Yeah, enthusiasm, a lot of work also, Paris. Thank you so much. We'll see you in a bit.
Yes.
Up next, we meet a unique White Sox fan with a knack for drawing.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Well, the White Sox came up short today as their season ended with a loss to Oakland, but it was still a memorable year. All season long, one fan in the south suburbs has scored all 63 games and then illustrated the scorecards with original artwork. Producer Mark Vitale met him in a backyard in Tinley Park where the wind was definitely blowing out.
I became unemployed in March, so I had some free time and I decided to throw a little bit extra into a creative project. And I've always been a huge baseball fan and a big scorebook guy. And I decided to score every game and then illustrated out the big plays, the big action. Just describe the games in illustrations.
Carl Scanberg is a lifelong Sox fan and a self-taught artist.
So I sketch it all out in pencil as I'm watching the game, and I'm drawing them quick. So I don't get too crazy in the details or focus too much on a player. I really try to get more of the overall look of a swing or the overall look of a play, or really capture their motion of a pitching motion or something like that. And then after the game's over, I sit down and kind of flesh it out in ink and finalize everything.
Scanberg works in many graphic styles, from realistic portraiture to cartoons. You might say he has a good change-up.
For years, I was an editorial cartoonist for the Southtown for 7 years. So I did a lot of cartoons that were editorializing the team and sometimes not so kind to them. So it was nice of them to invite me to do some things for the team in the last couple of years.
In 2017, the team enlisted him to illustrate some big games, but this latest project was done for the love of the game. One of his favorite games of the year? That's a no-brainer.
Is there a no-hitter?
The no-hitter was great. It was a fun one to illustrate for sure, and then I really liked the way Giolito's come into his own and turned his career around and become an ace of the Sox, and it's really fun to watch him and the rest of the team. Jose Abreu is one of the all-time great Sox at this point. He's had a great year. Tim Anderson on the field, I love watching him field balls. Just the steps, it's almost like a ballet when he's doing a pirouette, and it gets repetitive because you're drawing the same player over and over, but I like to draw. Keuchel's beard is fun.
Scanberg has documented a baseball season unlike any other, but mainly he's just excited about his team.
When the season was starting, I'm like, there's going to be an eventful year because there's a bunch of rookies starting debuting this year, so I felt I wanted to document that as well, so it just seemed like a good year to do it this year. A lot of big players, new guys coming up, young kids. It's an exciting team.
He's taking it one game at a time.
I think they have 12 more to win for a championship. It'd be nice if they keep it to 12. I don't want to draw a lot of losses.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Well, unfortunately, Carl drew his final Sox loss today. You can find out more about those White Sox illustrations on our website. Up next, Jeffrey Bear on an iconic Chicago folk music club and an all-new Ask Jeffrey.
Ask Jeffrey is made possible in part by the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer.
It's been a tough year for Chicago's music venues, shuttered since March because of the pandemic. But the city's rich history of live performances lives on. In this week's Ask Jeffrey, we have the story of a Chicago nightclub that helped launch the careers of artists like Peter, Paul, and Mary, Shel Silverstein, and many more. And joining us now with more is Jeffrey Bear. Welcome back, Jeffrey.
Hi, Brandis.
So this question is, after watching your story on Shel Silverstein, I dug up footage from an old WTTW series called Open Air from 1972, which featured an hour-long reunion of the Gate of Horn Club in Chicago. What exactly was the Gate of Horn? That question comes from Rick Garofalo in Park Ridge.
Yeah, so we did this story a few weeks ago about Shel Silverstein, which is what he's referring to. And we want to really thank Rick for sending us the footage, because actually this particular episode of the series was missing from WTTW's own archive. So now we have it. What you're going to see here is a reunion concert of performers who appeared in the iconic Gate of Horn nightclub in Chicago. This was taped almost 50 years ago, Brandis, in a studio right down the hall from where you are sitting right now. By the time this show was made, the Gate of Horn had been closed for years. Our viewer, Rick, was actually at that concert almost 50 years ago, and he was also able to record it at home way back before the days of VCRs because he was in training back then for his future career as a broadcast engineer in Chicago. So in the late 50s and early 60s, the Gate of Horn, as you mentioned, hosted folk legends like Peter, Paul and Mary and Joan Baez, and comedy greats like George Carlin, pictured here in 1962, and infamously, Lenny Bruce, more on him in a minute. The Gate was one of the first folk music clubs, according to some, even the first folk music club, not just in Chicago, but in the entire United States, when it opened in 1956. Folk clubs became hotbeds of the counterculture movement in the 50s and 60s. The Gate's first home was in the cramped basement of the old Rice Hotel, shown here at the corner of Chicago and Dearborn on the near north side. This is a photo of folk singer Odetta performing on New Year's Eve in 1959 at the Gate. She was one of the club's early regulars, and she went on to influence everybody from Harry Belafonte to Carly Simon. The scene at the club became a tight-knit artistic community, and WTTW tried to recreate that feeling in our studios in 1972 with this reunion concert. Here are Gate regulars Shel Silverstein and George Carlin reminiscing.
And the music was really important, but it really wasn't what it was all about. The people were what it was all about, and the safety and the communication. That's what was really.
The counterculture didn't really have a name or anything identifiable except the music. The coffee houses used folk music, and that's
Right.
where you met. So they were.
That's right, and that's where you did everything.
So one of the key figures at the Gate was a local folk singer named Bob Gibson. He often performed with another big name from that time, Hamilton Bob Camp, and they even released a live album recorded at the Gate in 1961.
It's a very cool soundbite to see George Carlin and Shel Silverstein right there. Okay, so Jeffrey, what was behind the club in the first place?
Well, the Gate was founded, as I said, in 1956. The founder was a music manager named Albert Grossman, and he founded the club to showcase his clients and to discover new talent. Grossman would become quite the figure over the next decade, managing a few artists you might have heard of, like Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, and many more. Grossman would move on from the Gate of Horn in the late 1950s. In April of 1961, his partner, Alan Ribbick, opened a swankier standalone version a few blocks north of the original. The new one was at 1036 North State Street. The new club had better sound and was more spacious, but they still hosted folk acts like the Clancy Brothers, shown here in their famous knit sweaters. But slowly, some of the regulars from the old Gate started to fade away.
We're all going to need some knit sweaters very soon, Jeffrey. So you mentioned Lenny Bruce. How does he fit into all this?
Right. Well, so if you've heard of the Gate of Horn, it's possibly because you've heard of Lenny Bruce. He was, this irreverent, crass comedian, famous for his wild jokes and sometimes lewd commentary. In the early 1960s, Lenny Bruce became a target of law enforcement across the country. He was actually charged several times with obscenity and indecency, and that's exactly what happened on a night in December 1962 when Chicago police raided the club and arrested Bruce mid-performance. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for the Gate of Horn. The club had its liquor license revoked temporarily as a consequence of that arrest. The new owners eventually expanded the focus of the club, bringing in blues and jazz, but the magic was sort of gone by that point. The club closed by the mid-1960s. The 1972 reunion show brought many of the old regulars back together, and a new person, a Maywood-born folk legend, John Prine, who missed the Gate's heyday because he was in high school back then. I was a huge fan of John Prine, as so many others were. And as we know, he tragically passed away earlier this year from COVID-19. So let's take a listen to him performing his song, Sent.
There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes. Jesus Christ died for nothing, I suppose. Little pitchers have big ears, don't stop to count the years. Sweet songs never last too long on broken radios.
And we want to give special thanks to former folk club owner and musician Ed Holstein, and also to the Newberry Library's Paul DeRica for helping us so much by sharing their expertise with this story.
Okay, my co-anchor Paris Schutz is a big fan of John Prine as well. Thank you very much, Jeffrey Baer. And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details about the Gate of Horn. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Baer. That's at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
Such a classic song that was, Sam Stone by John Prine. What a wonderful recording there. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7 for the Week in Review.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud of their attorneys selected for the 2020 Illinois Super Lawyers List.